This series is going to talk about cognitive breaking as well as verbally accessible memory and situationally accessible memory systems in the brain. We blame ourselves to preserve the core thought in most humans that the world has meaning. As I've walked the long, hard road of self-compassion, I noticed that I increasingly move toward positive nihilism. There's no meaning, rejoice. Life is what you make it, and without an existential purpose or meaning, we can control what we choose to value. Verbal memory is narrative, and situational memory is perceptual and sensory. Situational memory is triggered involuntarily and is not verbally coded. It makes sense then that the bulk of reliving symptoms in PTSD are based on situational memories as they are more reflexive. This also explains why constructing narratives is helpful for traumatic processing and why we get caught in cognitive distortions, because we're interacting with pre-verbal memories and attempting to restore a narrative to something that is not sequentially coherent. Like my double standard effect. If he hit you, you were abused. I can see that clearly because I'm listening to you say, he hit me. I see the bruise on your cheek, and hitting people is abusive. If he hit me, I'm a bad person. I deserved it, so it's not abuse. The first statement is logical, and the second statement is illogical because the first statement is me cognitively going, in my morality structure, when is it appropriate for a husband to hit his wife? And coming up with, barring caveats and extraordinary circumstances, usually it is not appropriate. That is a cognitive process. It is not a memory. The second statement pulls from situational memory, which is baser and more instinctive. This is emotions, fear, anxiety, panic, dread, confusion. All of that puts a damper on your capacity to construct a solid logical argument. So when your brain comes up with is its best guess, it doesn't reference the morality structure. It starts at, why did he hit me? And pulls at a list of reasons to determine a meaning, the core thought that the world has meaning. And it comes up with, because I'm bad. Cognitive breaking is the difference between facts and memory. Cognitive breaking happens when we experience an event that is outside the limits of our capacity to coherently process. What's the biggest number? What is nothing? Why is yellow happy? We experience these blips all the time when we can't conceive of things, and our brain just writes them off as next. What's a million pennies look like? Whatever it looks like, next. With trauma, it's not so simple. Because when you experience an event, you can't just decide to write it off. You have to experience it. And by virtue of experiencing it, your brain has to process it. But it can't. Because these traumas are big and heavy and terrifying, and they deal with concepts our brains don't quite get. Like death. Like grief. Like things being over or incompatible. Like nothingness or everything. So we start to crumble. Outwardly, when we encounter death, we do form rational constructs around it and interact with those concepts throughout our existence through simple cognition. Death is an idea, and our brains are good at shooting ideas around, so we noodle it for 30 years. But when we actually have to deal with these events, not just hear about them or offer condolences or consider a hypothetical, but actively experience them, that's where our neurons start to shudder at the seams. I like to think of it as cognitive breaking, which goes hand in hand with the piece above and how we wind up with distorted views of the world and ourselves through having experienced trauma. Because our experiences are unanswerable questions, imponderable questions as Buddhism puts it, or Kerith as the Vulcans say in Star Trek. And that tracks back into the obsessive loops. We get stuck and we start repeating, like our code is broken. Our trauma is incompatible with the biology we were provided with to understand it. It exists outside the limit.